Limelight with so much I hadn't thought about. And then you ended with the word I wanted to begin with, wisdom. I guess before I begin, it's handout time. So, 3 handouts. The first, 40 years ago by Hannah Arendt, and it is the article which most makes me feel, as Roger said, that 40 years ago, when man landed on the moon, as they say in this, she, like many intellectuals, was asked, would it enhance or diminish man's dignity or stature? And she gave an extraordinarily profound answer, and I encourage you to read the essay, also available on Reserve Web if you search under Berkowitz. Right? So I'm going to use a few quotes from it. The second quote, which is one of 2 handouts from this book, well, the second handout, has the title page, and then 2 pages or 3 towards the end where he says, this is what being a singularitarian, his word of his invention, means to me personally. So he's distinguishing the subjective or personal from the objective claims. And the third quote handout has bullet point by bullet point for 5 pages of definition of what the singularity involves. So that's more of the hard claim based on realistic projections of a man, as Barbara says, who knows what he's talking about what can be expected in the next 35 years, 45 years. I think 35 years, 2045 is the date. You folks will be the ruling generation by today's life standards in your 50s. So, how many of you have read all or a large chunk of this book? All right, and how many of you have read virtually nothing of it? Good. So I hope that the 2 pages will help you. Both are his bullet points, one objective, one subjective. Okay. But before going into connections between him and Arendt's essay, I want to give you a few quotes with the wisdom word. The first is from T.S. Eliot's play, Religious Drama. Sorry,
That's what you said.
A religious drama called The Rock, with choruses as a discourse. At one point the chorus says, where is the wisdom we lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we lost in information? A hierarchy of information, knowledge, and wisdom. Second quote is from the great philosopher who so often is Arendt's point of departure, Immanuel Kant. He quotes it in a little subchapter on learning, page 335. Science is organized knowledge, wisdom is organized life. So that gives us a lot of food for thought too. So I'm going to come to moments in both Kurzweil's and Arendt's texts where wisdom is the issue, even if the word isn't used, I think. Now, I think that...
Sorry.
No, that's the best. It might help you to take the last handout, which is pages 25 to 29. And if I can read a few of the bullets that will set up dialogue with Arendt, I think that will get us going. On page 26, Barbara's keyword, language, is the 3rd bullet down. When this singularity, these are points at which we can say the singularity has arrived. When this singularity has arrived, perhaps most important, machines can share their knowledge at extremely high speed compared to the very slow speed of human knowledge sharing through language. He's comparing the advantages of non-biological machine intelligence to human intelligence, which so often, when it is deeply thoughtful, perhaps even wise, expresses itself in language, and indeed slowly. I submit to you that the pairing of slow and fast, rather like the pairing of simple and complex, should be judged on a case-by-case basis. You shouldn't always consider faster better than slower, or more complex better than simple. Wisdom may perhaps be a form of the slowing down of knowledge to something deeply simple. Okay? And in this relative degradation of language from the category of speed, he would be in definite difference from Arendt, if I can find my handout. Here. On language, page 269, she's been asked, like many intellectuals 40 years ago or so, in the opening line of the essay, she quotes the question sent out. Has man's conquest of space, humans landing on the moon, increased or diminished his stature? And in her thinking, which has a great deal to do about what science had become 40 years ago, which in the Bible is a symbol for a very long time, and for Kurzweil even longer, I suppose. But she shows herself perfectly aware of much of what Kurzweil is talking about with electronic brains or computers. So I'm going to read the paragraph on 269 on the right, in the middle, which will end with the language problem. So, do you not have this?
Everyone has it.
Okay. Oh, you've memorized it. There are other difficulties in conquest of space of a less theoretical nature. Electronic brains share with all other machines the capacity to do man's work better and faster than man. Now, she's saying that. The fact that they supplant and enlarge human brain power rather than labor power causes no perplexity to those who know how to distinguish between the intellect necessary to play good checkers or chess and the human mind. This indeed proves no more than that labor power and brain power belong in the same category, and that what we call intelligence and can measure in terms of IQs has hardly any more to do with the quality of the human mind than being its indispensable conditio sine qua non, condition without which sort of you have to have it, but it's hardly the whole matter. There are, however, scientists who state that computers can do, quote, what a human brain cannot comprehend. Just as Barbara mentioned, we will have goals, Kurzweil claims, which currently we can't even imagine. And this is an altogether different and alarming proposition, for comprehension is actually a function of the mind and never the automatic result of brain power. If it should be true, and not simply a case of a scientist's self-misunderstanding, that we are surrounded by machines whose doings we cannot comprehend, although we have devised and constructed them, it would mean that the theoretical perplexities of the natural sciences, quantum physics and so on the highest level have invaded our everyday world. But even if we remain in the strictly theoretical framework, the paradoxes that have begun to worry the great scientists themselves are sufficiently serious to alarm the layman. Whereas the oft-mentioned lag, this is where we have to use our brain power to deduce the missing letters on the far left, of the social sciences with respect to the natural sciences, or of man's political development with respect to his technical and scientific know-how, is no more than a red herring drawn on this something. It can only divert attention from the main problem, which is that man can do, and successfully do, what he cannot comprehend and cannot express in everyday human language. So, I think it's so good that Barbara began speaking for and about language, giving Kurzweil full credit for thinking about computers and language. And here is Arendt saying that whatever may come in the future, we are already in a condition where the things we have made can do things we cannot comprehend or express in language. So it might very well be the case that part of the Singularity's approach is an increase of this perplexity, and it would be truly disorienting. So we have to be aware of that. I might add that, as when Barbara mentions an algorithm for justice, that it will certainly mean, as has always been the case in times of intellectual excitement and pressure, that our key terms will have to be redefined. For instance, virtue or excellence in the time of Socrates, or goodness in the time of Confucius. They were doing major redefinitions of earlier, and I might add more sexist, male warrior definitions of virtue or goodness, and they were doing it under the pressure both of social change and an immense intellectual ferment. So I suggest that part of the challenge that she and he share 40 years apart will be not to be afraid of redefining our key terms, very much in their spirit. Be it justice, or man's stature, human dignity, which Roger gave a very thoughtful talk about as not being the last word on the subject, as for instance in human rights discussions. Let us not all just say, well, once we've agreed that human dignity is at issue, end of thinking, right? So, I guess I need this close at hand. The second point in his big bullet presentation, I would say is page 28, 4 bullets from the bottom. And I think this is another of his briefs for the merging of human and machine intelligence, and all the superior features, or so many of the ways in which machine intelligence is superior. He says, once non-biological intelligence gets a foothold in the human brain, this has already started with computerized neural implants, so don't think it hasn't begun. The machine intelligence in our brains will grow exponentially, as it has been doing all along, at least doubling in power each year, about years long. In contrast, biological intelligence is effectively a fixed capacity. Thus, the non-biological portion of our intelligence will ultimately predominate. Well, this cannot be anything but scary, but courage is in order, and you are young and therefore, according to Aristotle, courageous. So you will want to think more and more about biological intelligence, as with children learning to read. Now, if I can find another connection, I think I will have done. Well, I'll just mention in passing, without going into it, that in Arendt's article, page 275, she's concerned with limits and mortality. And these might be the terms on which she and Kurzweil diverge the most profoundly. He is not a man who wants limits or mortality to be our last word or the end of our thinking or doing. So she says, well, the speed of light is the best known sure limit now. He says, he refers to something called superluminal experiments or phenomena above the speed of light, and says, well, not necessarily. Don't be so dogmatic. Maybe not. What's the consequence? For her, the speed of light plus the mortal lifespan biologically given mean we won't ever colonize beyond our solar system. Okay. Therefore, for her, when we've completely colonized our solar system, we will have at a new level reached a known limits. For him, he just wants to bracket that and says, well, I suppose we'll get over the speed of light. Then we'll colonize the entire universe. That will be the destiny of the universe, not just of man. So big difference, all right? Accompanied by living long enough until they can live to teach you to help you to live forever. So I think my final comparative quotation will have to do with mortality. Page 371 is his first bullet of his personal philosophy, subjective, and it's significant that it should be so. 371, bullet number 1. We have the means right now to live long enough to live forever. Existing knowledge can be aggressively applied to dramatically slowing down aging processes, so we can still be in vital health when the more radical life-extending therapies from biotechnology and nanotechnology become available. But most baby boomers, that's me, I was born right after the atomic bomb, perhaps due to it. It ended the war and my father went home. Most baby boomers won't make it because they are unaware of the accelerating age processes in their bodies and the opportunity to intervene, or, I would add, from a disinclination to live further. Now, let's listen to Arendt on mortality towards the end of our address, page 278. We begin on the challenging left margin, but happily end on the complete right margin. I think that we can deduce that there's a paragraph beginning after, in the middle of page 278, where it says, even if man recognizes that there might be absolute limits to his search for knowledge, and that it might be wise to suspect such limitations whenever it turns out that the scientist can do more than he is capable of understanding or comprehending. That was the alarm she set off. And even if he realizes that he cannot conquer space because of the speed of light limit, but at best make a few discoveries in the solar system, the journey into space and to the Archimedean point, Archimedes said, "Give me somewhere to stand and I will move the earth," meaning with his recently discovered lever. It's all monosyllables: dos, moi, ku, sto, kai, ting, game, tineso. So it's the way scientist doesn't think of itself as human, but as outside the earth, the Archimedean point. With respect to the earth, the journey into space and to the Archimedean point with respect to the earth is far from being a harmless or unequivocally triumphant enterprise. It could add to the stature of man inasmuch as man, in distinction from other living things, is something to be at home in a territory, desires to be at home in a territory as long as possible. In that case, he would only take possession of what is his own, i.e. the solar system, although it would have taken him a long time to discover it. These new possessions, like all property, would have to be limited, and once the limit is reached and the limitations established, the new worldview that may conceivably grow out of it is likely to be once more geocentric and anthropomorphic. Although not in the old sense of the earth being the center of the universe and of man being the highest being that is, it would be geocentric in the sense that the earth and not the universe is the center and home of mortal men. And it would be anthropomorphic in the sense that man would count his own factual mortality among the elementary conditions under which his scientific efforts are possible at all. Which is why she ends on the next page, the last sentence. If they, the scientists conquering space, should reach this Archimedean point, the stature of man would not simply be lowered by all standards we know of, but have been destroyed. Now, I want to end with the thought that if Arendt were at this table, this is his desk, she would also say that the wonder about humans is not their mortality, their natality, their ability to give birth, to be born and to give birth, and each human born is potentially capable of thinking or doing something new. This gives her joy, love of the world. And therefore, if Kurzweil has launched us on this enormous challenge to think about something new, I think in that sense she would be his best conversational partner. She would not stop thinking. She would say, all right, I accept your challenge. I will try to rethink my definition of human stature, of mortality as a defining limit, of the essential separateness in nature or ontologically of machine intelligence and biological intelligence, or machine intelligence and human intelligence. Whatever else, she would take his challenge as occasion for rethinking the matter.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.